I'm a ventriloquist.
No.
Yeah.
You're a ventriloquist, huh?
No, the word is ventriloquist.
That's what I said.
No, you didn't say ventriloquist.
Ventriloquist.
All right, sound it out.
Huh?
Sound it out like this. Then.
What?
Repeat after me. Then.
Then.
Good. Trill.
Trill.
Oh.
Oh.
Quist.
Quist.
Ventriloquist.
Ventriloquist.
Try it again.
What?
Faster. Then.
Ventriloquist.
Then.
Ventriloquist.
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 No, all right. Anyway. Very young, I was fascinated by puppets of all kinds. And I think a lot of kids just are fascinated by puppets. I was visiting a friend's house when I was 5 years old. And so I barely remember this, but there are images that are still very vivid to me. I remember at his house, he had a little Danny O'Day puppet that was used by Jimmy Nelson back in the 60s. This is what I clearly remember. It was sitting on a mantle up above the fireplace. And I remember looking up at it and just thinking, okay, that is really cool. You know, the slot jaw mouth, and there was just something about it that was intriguing to me. And so I asked if I could see that or play with it. And of course they pulled it down and said, oh yeah, this is Danny O'Day. And it had a little string in the back of the neck that would make the mouth open up. And so I just remember thinking this was really a neat little puppet. So that year, for my birthday, I asked for a ventriloquist puppet. And my grandmother actually found a very similar puppet. It wasn't Danny O'Day, it was Charlie McCarthy, who of course was the character that was used by Edgar Bergen. So she found this Charlie McCarthy puppet, and then she also found a record made by Jimmy Nelson called Instant Ventriloquism. And it was very basic lessons in ventriloquism. It was how to make substitute sounds to imitate those sounds that you normally form with your lips. That's basically ventriloquism. So for example, the B sound or the B sound, the substitute for that is the D sound, because you can say D, without moving your mouth. The practice comes with making that D sound like a B. And the record was actually quite simple in giving this instruction on this record album. You say D, but you think B. That was the explanation. But I remember sitting in front of a mirror and practicing, and he gave us a phrase. The boy bought a basketball. And of course, when you first start that, it's the boy bought a basketball. But you think B. So then you basically kind of train yourself to make that D sound like a B, so that it's more like this. The boy bought a basketball. The boy bought a basketball. Now, when you force that through your nose and change the voice, it gives a little different timbre to the sound, and it can sound even more convincing. So that in a character's voice, that would be, the boy bought a basketball. The boy bought a basketball. And so that's the D sound, but you make it sound like a B. Other difficult sounds would be M and P. Anything that involves bringing your lips together, you have to find a different way of saying that. And so the record taught me how to do that. And then over time, I started to develop some skills. When I was 8 years old, I got into a little talent show with Cub Scouts. And I definitely remember this because I remember sitting on the stage and I was the next act to go up, and the curtain was closed. And they introduced me and the curtain opened up and there was the audience. And I remember thinking, this is really cool. There was just something about that just seemed really cool to me, to be on stage and to perform my little show. So at the age of 12, I decided to get more serious about acquiring a real professional puppet. Because up till then, of course, I was just using these toy puppets that you could get at a store. And so I began the process of learning about where do these ventriloquists actually get these puppets, these really cool puppets that they use in their act. I learned about a ventriloquist museum in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky. And as it turned out, they had a whole list of the ventriloquist, what they called figure makers. There were probably, on the list, I'm going to say there were probably 15 or 20 people that were doing this. And then I remember how exciting that was to go to the mailbox and start getting responses from these various ventriloquist puppet makers and going through their materials that you could order from. And you could also customize whatever you wanted in terms of, if you wanted to have this particular face, but you wanted to alter the cheeks or the nose or whatever, you could talk to them about how to do that. And the cost of that was going to be about $500. So as a 12-year-old, of course, that was all the money in the world. And how am I going to come up with $500? But I asked that year for holidays where you would normally get a gift from family. I requested, all I want is money. So if you're going to spend money on a gift, could you please just give me a check? But here's what it is that I'm wanting to get. And so thankfully, family members rallied around that. They didn't see me as just some kid that's just, begging for money, to blow it on something. They knew that I had a vision. And the character that I got, I named him Otis. And I used him for many, many years. And so I was very motivated because I felt like, okay, now I can really start to build a real professional ventriloquist act. And I began to get real serious about writing material and putting together a show that would be entertaining. I put this guy on my knee and I just started to play with him and perform with him. It was just magical for me to begin the process. That just kind of happens as a ventriloquist, as you're working with a puppet. There's something that just happens where the personality starts to come out as you're playing with it. And so this is Mac. Here he is.
Well, how you doing? What's going on, man?
Yeah, so since he is a classic, I thought, the tuxedo is a nice look for him. So these ventriloquist figures are controlled differently depending on who made them and, how they designed them. There's lots of really cool expression you can get from him because, of course, the mouth is the most important part, but then you can also get extra expression because the upper lip goes up and the nose wiggles, the tongue sticks out, the ears wiggle, and the hair that pops up, like he gets scared, like oops.
Wow!
The eyebrows actually on this particular model are controlled by weights, and so it all moves according to how you tilt the head. And as you're working with a puppet, you're looking in the mirror, kind of watching how he moves, and of course, experimenting with how he would sound. And so the sound, his voice, eventually became what would be kind of a classic ventriloquist, a figure's voice, which is that very nasally sound.
So, how you doing?
So, of course, I'm a ventriloquist.
What?
I'm a ventriloquist.
No.
Yeah.
Ventriloquist.
Try it again.
What?
Faster.
Ventriloquist? Ventriloquist?
Ventriloquist?
Ventriloquist.
No, all right. Anyway, so that's actually an old routine. There have been a few ventriloquists that have done, that or something similar to it, this back and forth really fast thing. And so that was, for me anyway, just even a little piece that I would just do just to practice and work on that skill of changing my voice fast and, having the fast exchange with the character. So, and that is a bit that I actually use on my show still. So now fast forward to college. People were starting to take note of this unique thing that I did and inviting me to do shows here and there. So I was asked by this Christian ministry crew to work with us and come up with a little routine with your ventriloquist act that would be fun and creative and would capture people's attention. And I remember thinking, well, if I'm promoting this thing, I probably ought to go. So that, of course, was also very transformational for me because it was really at that fall retreat that I began to learn to live a life that is pleasing to the Lord. I remember going to Daytona Beach my freshman year, where we would go out on the beach and share our faith, and I brought Otis along with me. And so then I would reach into my case and I would pull out Otis and I would launch into a little routine, and everybody would kind of gather around and watch the show. And then at the end of this routine, I would say, well, ventriloquism is not the most important part of my life, but actually the most important part of our lives is that we have a relationship with God through Jesus. And so that became the transition to be able to talk to people about Christ. So I began to get a vision for how the Lord actually might use this. And I was totally captivated by this idea that here's a way that I could actually potentially build a bridge to the gospel on stage. And so I started to think about how I might do that. And what I now do in my show that has been developed over time is I take Aunt Tilly, who is a character that came along when I was in college. I had her made for me.
Doctor, give me a laxative and some Prozac. Normally I'm very regular. 7 o'clock every morning.
All right, Tilly, that's great.
Oh, no, that's bad.
That's bad.
I don't get up till 8. Oh, my.
How are you doing, Tilly?
I'm all right. I can sit up and take nourishment.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
So now, Tilly, I'm going to do something a little bit different.
What's that?
I'm just going to put you down.
What?
I'm going to put you down on top of the suitcase.
Honey, I'll die.
You'll be all right.
David,
What's wrong?
I'm hanging.
Oh, all right. Well, sorry. Actually, I'll just put you right here.
Oh, be careful, honey.
Doing all right? You're all right. So I take my hand outside. I take my hand out of Aunt Tilly. And of course, what happens? Here's this character that was alive and talking. And now all of a sudden, she doesn't say anything. And what I'll tell the audience is I'm going to hold her up in a way that you typically wouldn't see a ventriloquist. I'm going to hold her up just like this. Looks kind of sad, but here's what I want us to think about. Aunt Tilly was made just for me. I had her fashioned and designed with a specific purpose in mind, to be used in my show to entertain people. Now, she's not a human being, of course, but you might say made in the image of a human being. Actually, she was made to favor my grandmother a little bit. That's why there is a family resemblance there. So she's not my grandmother, but you might say made in her image. What I want us to think about is that you and I were created as well. Now, we were created in the image of God. We are not God, but we are created in His image. Now, Aunt Tilly here has a little problem. She has no life, well, apart from me. You and I have a similar problem. We have no spiritual life apart from a relationship with Him. That's the way we were made. It's the way we were designed. It's the purpose for which we were created. But when we are not in the relationship with Him, there is something that's missing in our lives. There's an emptiness that exists that nothing can fill. We chase after things that we think are going to bring us satisfaction in life. That always escapes us. Now, the Bible speaks of this condition. It says throughout the Bible, but probably most clearly in this one verse that we often quote, Romans 3:23, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And Romans goes on to say that the wages or the penalty of sin is death. In other words, spiritual separation from God, such that there is nothing that we can do to have the relationship with Him that we were intended to have. We can't be good enough people. We can't be moral enough people. We can't even be religious enough people because of this problem of sin that's separated us from Him, and it's left us hopeless. But fortunately, God does not leave us in this condition, but He's in fact given us the way to have a relationship with Him, and that He has done in the gift of His Son, Jesus, who has died on the cross, taking that death penalty for sin that you and I owe. He's taken that upon Himself. But He's not only died on the cross, He's risen again from the dead, demonstrating to us that He is in fact who He claimed to be, that He is God in the flesh. And He invites us to place our faith and our trust in Him. Jesus actually put it like this. He said, I'm the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him will bear fruit. In other words, have a fruitful life. But apart from me, says Jesus, you can do nothing. But when we place our faith and our trust in him, he comes into our lives, fills our lives, and makes us the people that he's created us to be. He literally lives in us and through us. But most importantly, that restores to us the relationship that we were intended to have in the first place, the relationship with God. That restores the purpose for which we were created. You ready?
Not really.
Go ahead.
Softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling for you and for me. See on the portals, he's waiting and watching, watching for you and for me. Come home, come home. You are weary, come home. Earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling, oh sinner, come home.
I've had Aunt Tilly sing this hymn in a lot of settings, but some of the more interesting places are inside of prisons, where I look out at some of these inmates, many of whom perhaps have grandmothers that are praying for them while they're there. And I'll watch some of them get a little misty-eyed even as they hear this hymn. So for me, this has become a way to use something that God has prepared me for my whole life. I didn't know when I was learning to become a ventriloquist at 6 years old that this was what all this was leading up to. It was just something that was fun to do. But I think that God prepares us and he gives us gifts along the way. And there comes a point in your life when you realize that God has given me this gift. That added a whole new dimension to what I do as a ventriloquist. Now it's not just something that I do on stage to make people laugh and to entertain them, but it's a way to actually build a bridge to give people hope and to give them the greatest message in the world, and that is that God loves you. So I would encourage you or anybody, whatever your talent might be, and it could be anything, it could be any skill, any ability, but to use that and ask him to show you, to reveal to you, what would that be? That's what God did for me. He just started to reveal to me, this is how I want you to use the talent that I've given you. This is what I've prepared for you to do. And I think that he wants everybody to know that. And whatever that might be, whatever your talent, whatever your skill, whatever your ability, know that God has given that to you. And there's an opportunity for you to use that for his kingdom purposes and his work in this world. Well, I'm going to go ahead and put her back.
Oh, be careful, honey.
Sorry, you'll be all right.
Oh, I hate this.
I know.
Well,
You all right?
not really.